What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another draft breakdown video for the Detroit Lions. Now, this draft breakdown is going to be a little bit different. Number one, it's probably going to be shorter. I know I always say that. Never happens. This was a two-way player in his last year in college, and the side of the ball that we're going to be discussing today, he had much less snaps at, so that's just in general going to be a lot shorter for a breakdown. But also, I wanted to touch on how I feel like he could fit into this Lions depth chart and affect those around him, and how that could impact, say, the 53-man roster when that time comes around. So we're going to bounce around to some different points. This isn't like your pure draft breakdown. And again, we're not looking at both sides of the ball here. We absolutely could revisit this and look at the other side of the ball for this player. I got no issue with doing that. Going to make sense. So let's get it started. Welcome everybody to our video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with another draft breakdown video. And I guess in a way, we can kind of call this part one because the player did play both sides of the football in his final year with Utah. Because today, we're talking about Sione Vaki. Recently, I did a show on Bleacher Report this past week, and we kind of did like our initial building out the 53-man depth chart for the Lions. So feel free to go check that out. We talked about a couple different UDFAs, guys that I think could surprise, where really the roster battles I think are going to take place. And one specifically, of course, is always the receiver position. It's always about the depth at receiver. But this year's really interesting because we have a lot of guys that are seemingly going to be stepping into larger roles, like a lot of guys that we maybe haven't seen a ton from, so they're stepping into larger roles, but we really expect those players to be on the roster. Like, I feel like we have 4 locks at receiver, and then it's like, okay, who's number 5? And then do they keep more than 5? That's the question right now. And I know you're probably thinking, why are you talking about receivers right now? Well, I think the receiver position is directly going to have an impact on this, and really it's going to start here. So over the years, we've seen the Lions with their 53-man roster be willing to not necessarily just say, like, oh, we have to come in with this amount of players. I think there's a lot that goes into it strategically when you just talk about, like, okay, how likely is that we're going to get this player back if we cut him? Like, if we cut this player and he has to go through waivers, how likely is it that he gets brought back? Maybe a little bit less likely, so maybe we cut this guy instead because we think we can get him back on the practice squad. Or maybe it's like, hey, we don't want to necessarily, get rid of this guy's contract because he's got multiple years on a rookie deal, so let's not touch that. So I think there's different factors that go into it for sure. But over the last few seasons, we've seen the Lions' willingness to not necessarily say the 53-man roster has to be exactly what you would expect. Like, it has to have this many players at this position. You have to have a kicker. I mean, the Lions came in without a kicker at one point. It was like, okay, well, we know they're going to add somebody. They did through the practice squad, and that's how we had our kicker. But we've seen the Lions do that. They've kind of went off the board a little bit. I think the one year we had 2 tight ends coming in. It's like, 2 tight ends? We need some depth there. That's what the Lions did. And to me, it has signified most of the time that the Lions are trying to keep who they believe are their best 53. Most of the time. Again, there's little factors that go into that as well. But I think that the receiver position is so interesting this year because there is a lot of questions where if you said, okay, they're keeping 6 receivers, we can knock out the top 4. We know Jamo's going to be here. We know Khalif's going to be here. We know Saint's going to be here. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to be here. I believe so. So then you get to number 5, and I think there could be some question. I think there's competition for Antoine Green. I think a guy like Caden Davis brings a lot of competition, similar skill set. Then you go down, you look at Traquan Smith, be a little bit as well there. Darius Fountain, who to me draws some similarities to Donovan Peoples-Jones just in terms of play style. So you have guys who get Isaiah Williams, the undrafted free agent, I'm a big fan of out of Illinois. So there's guys there. The Lions could absolutely keep one. I mean, if one of those guys balls out, absolutely keep him on the roster. But I do think that there's a real possibility, and I'm not here to make my 53-man roster prediction right here. You can go check out that show, though. It's kind of an early talk of it. But I do think that receiver could turn into that position this year where we may end up at a point kind of talking ourselves into, like, okay, well, who's that next guy? Like, who's that next guy have to be? But we see for the Lions is if that's not clear cut, if someone else in another position and they just rather keep that player, they'll do that. And they'll come in with less. And maybe we're like, oh, they don't have enough receivers. But they're like, you know what? We're fine. So if we just said hypothetically, they said Antoine Green's receiver 5, and they're like, let's cut it right there. Boom, we'll just keep 5 receivers. Some of us may say that's kind of light. Maybe they should have another receiver in there. That being said, though, I think a player like this could add that flexibility for the Lions because one thing that we talked about in that Bleacher Report show is that when I was preparing for that and I was just watching game film from last season, one thing that I had noticed is at times, especially later in the season, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs lining up at receiver. And we know that he has real capabilities as a pass catcher. It's where I had my highest grade when he was drafted by the Lions, and I thought that it took a long time for the Lions to really utilize him. I thought the way that they should have. The future is just super bright for him there. I still believe that he has so much skill set as a receiving back that that's going to become a big part of his game, more so than we even saw, last season. That being said, though, you still did see like reps where he would line up at receiver. I saw a rep where he was lined up stacked up at receiver, and he ran like a deep crossing route into the back of the end zone. Ball didn't go his way. I believe it was against Denver. He went the opposite way and threw the crosser. I think the Sam Laporta scored a touchdown, so it worked out. But Jahmyr Gibbs got open, right? We know he can run away from guys. But seeing that flash was like, man, I know that that's in there, and that's something that I expected coming into last year. We just didn't maybe see it a ton, but I'm not going to count out that that's something the Lions could still value. And now the Lions come back in this year's draft, and they draft Sione Vaki. I apologize if I'm saying the name incorrectly. I'm going to stick with Vaki here. They draft Vaki out of Utah at pick 132. Now, of course, he played a majority of his snaps, for 2 seasons there at Utah after the 2-year church mission. He played at safety for Utah. However, in his final season with Utah, he also mixed in at running back through 7 games. I mean, some games more than others, kind of mixed in for depth purposes, and then he kind of popped, and it was like, maybe this guy should keep getting touches. But he also lined up as a receiver as well. Now, he wasn't like your typical slot receiver, but he was a receiver back in high school, and man, he was a dynamic receiver back in high school. He also has a returning background as well, so he looks very natural in that spot, and it makes sense because he has a background in doing that, even though, again, for 2 seasons, we could look at him playing safety. Now, for me, kind of spoiler, like the games that I had went through before the draft, where we took him at, I thought maybe it was early for him as a safety. Liked him. I thought that his play speed was much better than anything else because I thought he processed quickly, he took good angles, those kind of things. I just thought like versatility-wise, I had a lot of questions. I fell a little bit early for specifically a safety, but I was like, okay, I guess I get it because my highest grade was football intelligence. Then we find out that maybe the Lions have more visions for him potentially as a running back, like we saw at Utah in a very small sample size. And as Brad Holmes put it, like he didn't even major in running back, yet he still looked really good at that position when he just got some spot reps there. And then again, the background of playing receiver, he had carries from the receiver position in high school from what I was able to tell as well. But having that background, being a natural receiving weapon, like it makes sense. But then you saw how talented he was when the ball was in his hands, just as a natural runner. Whether that's him bringing specifically that flexibility of like, okay, this guy can line out as a receiver at times. This guy can win level 1, level 2, even though we also saw him win level 3 on some of his wheel routes, but this guy can separate underneath. We'll talk about that. He has a real ability to separate because of the way that he runs routes. And again, that receiver background really shows off. You're like, oh, he kind of looks like a receiver. Then when you find out he did it in high school, it's like, this makes a ton of sense. So whether that's him bringing that flexibility or also now saying, hey, we have this piece that now really can back up, to me, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs really well, doesn't have the same long speed, doesn't have the same necessarily agility either, but he's definitely a playmaker. The ball gets in his hands, he's a playmaker, he can take it to the house. All right, he's a gifted pass catcher. So when you have that direct backup, it feels like for Jahmyr Gibbs now you also bring again more flexibility to the table for now Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, hey, we can put Jahmyr Gibbs out because now we know we could also have Vaki in the backfield and we could still get a dynamic playmaker there while also now having him a receiver. So I think he just adds flexibility, and that's just something I would keep an eye on because, again, keeping 6 receivers, how often does that 6th receiver actually get snaps, right? It doesn't happen a ton unless there's injuries, but it's also the fact that if the guy can separate, if he can win level 1, if he can win level 2, if he can win in the areas where Goff is most comfortable with throwing the football over the middle of the field, Goff obviously not the most mobile, and he's not the most threatening with his legs, so having a dynamic running back that he can just give the ball to, right, just check it down to that guy and let him go make something happen, it's a really nice piece to have. I still think there's a lot of things that we have to see there. There's still not a massive sample size of that, but I just think that it's interesting, and I think it's something that should be kind of taken into account with this draft pick, is not only the flexibility that he can open up for others, but also just the direct flexibility that he can add to our offense and how this thing may end up shaking out. But we'll see. I'm not saying Lions can't keep more than 5 receivers. They might. They absolutely might. One of those guys stands out. To me, Vaki's absolutely making the team, though, because he just brings so much versatility. He could play safety. He could. I think there could be lack of versatility in some spots there, but he absolutely could because he's smart. He also brings a lot of special teams upside, even though I had some tackling issues back in college at times, right? And also, giving up the edge, those kind of things. Right mindset and play speed to be successful on special teams. We also saw some special teams usage, and now it looks like he may be, end up the returner for the Lions with these new kick return rules, which also would make a ton of sense. So the guy's going to make the roster. If you're asking yourself, who is Sione Vaki? Well, let me tell you. So this is a 5'11", 200-pound running back / safety out of Utah. And as I said, that final season, which is what we're going to specifically talk about today, because I want to talk about him as a running back. So I'm doing this part 1, you can call it, as a running back, because I think that's what he's going to mainly be, and I think that he could be special here. Now, I also would probably want to say and label this more so as he's a weapon than just a running back, kind of like what we said with Jahmyr Gibbs or what Brad Holmes said with Jahmyr Gibbs, like he's a weapon. I think Brad Holmes had kind of the vision, maybe what I saw a little bit after we did our draft breakdown of like, well, this guy is dynamic in the passing game. Remember the scouts were talking about it in their Lions video, the Kansas State game was like, yo, that was awesome. And I think that's really get that weapon from is like, wait, he's kind of a receiver too. Like he's dynamic there too. And I think Vaki kind of fits into that category, whether that's a weapon that he can play multiple spots, play on both sides of the ball, or it's the fact that he's a weapon in the sense that he's not just a pure running back, but he's very, very versatile in the passing game, and he has a real background in that. He's had success at the college level, and you could see the flashes. You can really buy into, like, this guy could be effective in the passing game, too, which brings third down value, which is extremely valuable. It's just a question of pass protection, which we really didn't see at all at Utah. That is a massive question. That's a box that he's going to have to check. I think the toughness is there, but it is a box that he's going to have to check. Probably technically speaking, I'm assuming there's going to be a work in progress. So with that being said, let's dive into this. Again, I'm going to try to keep this more short and sweet, but starting off with some of the testing numbers, ran the 4.62 40, but he also posted reportedly a 4.51 40 at his pro day, which is obviously a much better score. It also had a lower 10-yard split than 1.57 unofficially, but he did post the 1.54 10-yard split at the combine with 20 bench press reps and nearly 40-inch vertical. So the explosiveness is there. The burst is there when you talk about the 10-yard split, which is very noticeable when he plants sticks and just gets upfield. The burst that he carries, that 10-yard burst, is very noticeable. The play speed to me is better than that 40 time. The 4.51, I'm not going to say that's necessarily more accurate. I could kind of see it being in between those, but it's all about the play speed because it doesn't matter. If he plays fast, and that's what's important, and he has good play speed. The testing scores are really those strong. Where it's not necessarily as strong is more so of the unofficial scores of the 3-cone drill being listed at a 7.16, which is not necessarily great there, and I think that shows up on film as well, and also the shuttle time at a 4.28. The problem with doing this as a pure running back is that we're doing a lot of this on projection in terms of we have just seen a ton of him as a running back, haven't really seen him in pass protection. That's always a massive question about a running back. It's the limited amount of carries that he had this past season. 42 carries for 317 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's it. 42 carries. That's the sample size that you have to look at with Utah. That's very, very limited when you're getting into a grade here. We go through a good amount of games before we felt good about actually giving a grade here, and this is a very small amount of reps to do that based on. So I'm sure the Lions dove into some of the high school stuff too. But with that being said, from what I saw, this was an area where there were things that I liked, things that I didn't necessarily like. I think there's going to probably need some improvement here, just play speed, processing, getting to things a little bit quicker, also opening up his vision. I feel like in certain ways he gets a little bit tunnel vision. What I do like is that he hits short yardage quickly. He kind of started off as like the wildcat back. Like, okay, it was like, hey, give him the direct snap, let him make decisions from there, and that's where he was effective. And he had big plays, like against Cal. He broke a couple big runs on those. But I did like in short yardage situations. First off, this is a tough, physical, powerful finishing back. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but it's very effective for short yardage. So even though I'm saying these things like a backup to Gibbs, because there's that weaponism there, there's the flexibility there, legitimately strong, and he is tough in short yardage situations. Like from a vision perspective is the way that he sets up blocks, the way that he works with traffic around him, defenders, especially into the second and third level, the way that he can press, kind of squeeze a gap, then bounce off it, kind of slide defenders inside. Does a really nice job setting up defenders, pressing a gap, sliding off of that, being able to basically create chaos and then slide through it to pick up extra yards or create a run lane and open himself up to a run lane while just kind of utilizing like the chess pieces around him once he gets into that second and third level, because he does have an ability when he's out in space of just finding a way to finish, finding a way to get to the end zone, the correct angles. He also plays with really good lower body control. I think it's one of his biggest strengths just in general. Obviously going to show up in the pass game, but I think that his lower body control is huge when you talk about stop and start. You talk about just control in terms of contact balance, but also in vision, kind of the controlled strides when, again, pressing lanes, sliding into run lanes. That controlled ability in the lower body, very successful. It allows him to kind of get tight to blocks, squeeze up against blocks. For me, I do like the fact that outside zone schemes, whether that was a stretch, that he would typically press the landmark that he was supposed to get to. He wasn't going to break off of it early just because he got a sense of like, oh, there's some movement here, I'm just going to jump out of the play. He would typically push to where his landmark would be, and then he'd make the play off of that. He'd make the cut off of that slot, and he would allow the blocks to set up. He'd give them the opportunity to set up because he would press the run play the way it was intended to be ran.
So here you'll see the defensive tackle immediately jump into the B gap. So he's going to press inside. There he sees the linebacker, and he's going to show you that lower body control to stab back outside and then work back inside to set up the linebacker, set up his blocks, and allow himself a run lane to attack.
I did think that left at times some opportunities on the field. Like, for example, in stretch runs, it's not necessarily showing the vision of like, hey, the interior is getting movement. Maybe we just immediately cut up field. Like, let's see if we can quickly recognize that. And you didn't really get those glimpses of like, okay, he's just getting way off script here, but that's because he saw it. Instead, he's really going to press through the design.
Like here, you're going to see him play out this split zone look, but notice how he immediately gets to the second level. So he quickly recognizes that the B gap has been jumped, but he quickly gets his eyes to the second level. So he's going to continue to press outside. What that allows here is you see how the safety dives down, but he's not filling the right run lane. Then when he cuts upfield, now the defensive tackle got the shed, so now he's in his way. But for the defensive tackle, again, because he continues to press aggressively before sinking and then making his cutback lanes, it allows the backside to seal off, and it shoots him into the second level. So I love that patience and ability to press the line
and stick to kind of that plan before he's going to make his cut off of that. To me, this is a downhill runner. That's when he's at his best. He's getting downhill. He's able to kind of utilize those long strides. He plays with a really good pad level for a guy that's nearing 6 foot. Plays with a great pad level for a running back. The knee bend that he consistently plays with, and that lower body control. I think those are some of the traits that make you excited about him as a running back, and also brought a lot of success. He knows how to follow his lead blocks, kind of get his hands on the back and kind of follow their way through the traffic. You saw a lot of that again as kind of those wildcat looks, pulling offensive linemen, getting in front, allowing those guys to lead the way.
Beautiful example of allowing his block to set up. And on this play, you can see right here, getting a little bit wide to avoid the defensive tackle that got the penetration. He does quick with recognizing penetration and kind of widening his angles like that. But then it's also, you see how he wants to get outside, but he's going to press inside until, again, the block sets. Then he jump cuts outside of it, and that's allowing the block to set up for the big play.
What improved throughout the season was kind of getting himself square on some of the zone rushing opportunities where he wasn't just running, laterally, wasn't really pressing upfield. I thought that improved throughout the season, being much more square to the line of scrimmage, kind of opening up opportunities for himself. That being said, though, I think that's an area that's probably going to continue to need work and just going to continue to see more versatility in terms of the schemes that he runs behind, because, again, it was just such a limited sample size.
To me, this is one of the great examples of him processing into the second and third level. Here you can see on this power play, watch him read this safety coming down. Now, he can feel, again, peripheral vision really strong here. He can feel it, so he knows he has to hurry up this process. That way he doesn't get hit by the penetrating defensive lineman, but he reads into the safety and he tries to hold him inside before bouncing it back outside. I love that setup. He is very quickly to say, that's blocked, that's blocked. Who do I have to worry about? Who do I need to key on?
Again, kind of getting outside of the structure, noticing that there's some movement that's being created, and then like immediately just kind of be like, you know what, I'm going to cut back. Let me get into that because there's an opening right here that has been created early on the play. Just in general, his process will probably need to split up a little bit when you talk about kind of pressing offensive linemen, specifically in zone rushing plays. The early steps into the rep, probably going to need to speed up that process a little bit. But what I did like is that there was a real awareness, and his vision, while again a little bit, I thought at times tunnel vision, in the sense that even when you got him into the second and third level, you didn't necessarily get the sense that he could feel the entire picture. It was more so like, okay, let me react to this guy, and then this guy, and then this guy. And he did a really nice job of working through, like almost just kind of working through his reads. Like, all right, for example, in an outside zone, or hey, we're reading the tackle, okay, edge got outside, bam, I'm on to number 2. And then he would move his eyes into the second level, and he would very quickly get to that. He could really get through his like reads as a running back very quickly when he was hitting first, second, and let's get to the second. Okay, now find the next piece. And he was very quick to do that and make adjustments to those players. But he was kind of taking things on one by one rather than always feeling like he was seeing the full picture. Now, where I loved him, and this gave me, honestly, I think it's going to be my highest grade. We'll see at the end. But this is contact balance. I love the contact balance of this player. And this is something that always gets me just personally when I'm watching. I wish there was more carries to look at here. Like, for example, and I think this is a really good telling, like, what is your contact? I think it's a very important trait from every running back that I've had to do things on in the past. If they have really strong contact balance, typically works out. Vision is a big part of that. If you have those two things, but if you have contact balance, typically seems like it's going to work in the NFL. It's at some level. Like, I had Chris Brooks, BYU, guy goes undrafted, and with Miami, very small sample size, he was awesome. He was awesome. And it was like, that's a big power back, but the contact balance, loved it. This is what I love about Vaki, is the contact balance. I think he's great in this category. First off, he plays with really good knee bend, and you'll see it in kind of like the short lunges that he takes, and he's got that bursty ability to kind of shoot through gaps, but then he also plays with excellent pad level. Even you'd see this as a route runner. Looking back at some of his high school stuff, he ran routes really low with an aggressive demeanor. That way he could sink, drop his weight. He had that ability to drop his weight like you'd want from a receiver. He has that from a running back. So he's constantly playing with low pad level, plays with a wide base on contact. So you'll see him kind of spin off contact, maintain balance through contact. He's super strong, 20 bench press reps, the explosion in the lower body, strong lower body, kind of just rolls through arm tackles, right? I mean, this is a guy that's going to consistently feel like he's finishing forward, brings that power, but then he brings that contact balance where he does have the ability in that, again, that lower body control, some of that ankle flexion to kind of just stay on his feet, utilize his hands. He does this really well, the offhand, but that's a stiff arm, finding balance, utilizing his offhand to kind of keep himself upright. Now, where I think that he lacks here, and this is more to the agility side, is footwork-wise, he can get kind of tripped up. His feet can feel like they get stuck in the mud a little bit, like they don't necessarily bring the lift. They don't have necessarily some of the agility at some of like the ankle reaches, and he'll kind of get tripped up, and he won't necessarily be able to get out of some of those spots. That's where I think he lacks the most here, is his feet kind of feel heavy at times. But overall, the leg drive that he brings, the lowness that he plays with, the balance that he plays with off of contact, I think he's great in that category. I think that's going to serve him well. I'll quickly transition them because he plays with a lot of power as well. Consistently falling forward, like short yard situations, this is the guy that you want. You know, you want his legs to keep turning because you want an offensive lineman to get in late. He's that guy because he's just going to keep running his legs. You're going to get a chance to get behind and push him forward, even if he's not the guy that necessarily gets that initial movement, but he'll stay up on the play. He uses a very, very vicious stiff arm that's very effective. He plays with really nice power as well in his game. Now, here's the fun part, the pass game impact, okay? This is the fun part to me because this is where I think he separates himself a little bit here. This is where it gets really fun. This is where you talk about the weapon ability because this is where things get fun. You go back to the background in high school as a receiver, and you just see some of the grabs that he has. It's high school, but you see some of the grabs. The traits are still there. The ball tracking speed, right? The awareness of the sideline. You see the body control, and you're like, this looks all, the high pointing ability. You'll even see some of the route running. And then when you watch him in college, even when he's not getting the ball, he had a pretty diverse route tree that mainly lined up as a running back. Pretty diverse route tree from that spot, just taking notes of his routes. Most of the time, it'd be like a swing, or it'd be a wheel route, right? Or you get the angle routes out of the back, that little Texas route out of the backfield. Most of the time, it was kind of in that area. But you also did see then later in the season, it was like, hey, let's line him up wide, and let's run like a deep curl, and then we'll bring him back, and we'll run a mid-screen, right? We'll have the offensive line kick out, and then we'll have him run back to the ball, and then work back upfield that way. So you start to get some flexibility there. You start to see him sink into some of his routes. You're like, okay, there's some flexibility for him to really drop his weight at the top of the route. And to me, that's where things got exciting, is because I think there's so much potential here for how diverse this route tree can get. Sell that he gives at the top of his route, it brings a lot of ability to create separation. And then when you watch him, and you're watching him line up against, DBs that slide down, or especially anytime like an edge would like pick him up in coverage and you can just run right by him, then you're like, okay, now he's a little bit of a matchup problem as well. So I started to fall in love with all of the upside here, and actually a lot of this grade is based on projection more so than anything. First thing is the body control for me. The adjustments to the football, the natural tracking ability, which I think the tracking speed probably has a lot to do with him playing safety, because as I talked about, I thought his FBI was really high, so I thought his play speed was much higher than maybe his 40 time. That tracking speed translates really well as a safety. Go look at his high school stuff. I mean, he's picking the ball off. And when you watch him at receiver, you see that ability to naturally adjust to the football, track with a lot of speed down the sideline, being able to run through the football at the catch point, right? Doesn't look awkward. He looks so natural as a pass catcher in the sense that he's very comfortable running through the football, catching over his shoulder, adjusting to a ball that's thrown behind him. Very natural body adjustments. And I think that's huge because obviously, the ball's getting to you quick. And the other aspect of that is reactiveness. It's quick, reactive hands. That's huge because, again, the ball is getting on you quick. If you're running level 1 routes, you're within, 10 yards, all of a sudden we're in an aspect of the ball is going to get on you fast, right? You're making one cut, boom, the ball's on you. Out route, it's maybe slow curls that we were running the Gibbs last year, maybe this is the angle route, ball's going to get on you quickly. So I need you to have reactive hands that even if you see the ball late, it just got through the defense fine, like, oh, snap, there it is. You can quickly react to that. He showed that reactiveness, the fast, natural hands with the body adjustments as well. I think he's got a soft underhand pass catching technique. I didn't love here where it felt like he'd get on his forearms a little bit, and maybe he wasn't always getting his hands into these spots. We wouldn't always get like his hands properly on the ball, and instead he kind of just like trap it with like his forearms, and then things would get kind of bobbly. Then you would start to get to the kind of the ball security questions, which is for me kind of the aspect of that transition can be a little bit too long, too much of a process to catch and then tuck. He also seemingly wants to get into his left arm a lot. He may be a lefty. Anyways, that transition probably needs to speed up a little bit, and the ball security feels like you can get a little bit loose on him at times, kind of like immediately like catch, let's get that into your chest. So I would like to see that be more consistent, but I love how as a route runner, speaking of this, we talk about the upside. How about ready hands? You get this with receivers that struggle with this. Not an issue for him. Very ready hands to deal with the combat. Like here's an edge rusher. I'm trying to wheel out. He wants to chuck me off the line. Not going to happen. I got ready hands. I'm swiping that away. And you saw multiple reps of his ready hands working through the route. You saw it against Washington, even when he wasn't getting the football. So I love that he brings that aspect. He's a natural kind of receiving. He has a lot of natural receiving skills. Talk about the footwork, and this brings a lot of upside too. So not only can he drop his weight, but with that knee bend, you'll see it on like bubble screens, that ability to retreat and create the depth that he does, impressive. Opens up a lot within his route tree, in my opinion. Again, natural body catcher, and he also has the footwork for the sideline, but it's mainly the awareness. It's mainly just the feel. That's the big thing that stuck out to me there. Where it's going to have some downside here is just he has small hands, and he also has the aspect that he's got pretty short arms. So you could talk about kind of the radius that he brings, probably a little bit on the smaller side. I think his catch radius is a little bit on the smaller side. He reacts well to the ball, but in just terms of like, hey, if you just outstretch your arms, the balls get on you in a hurry, the catching radius is a little bit limited there. Now, he can go save a ball from behind him, but if it gets too wide, his radius is a little bit limited there. But he does show real leaping ability, so back to the explosiveness. If you were for whatever reason to throw him like a sideline, if it turned into like a fade out of a wheel route and it was like, hey, it's a jump on the sideline, he would have that awareness and also that explosion to go up in the air and at least knock it down. And I would bet on him that he would battle for the football in those spots. I have one of the lower grades here. It's the elusiveness aspect. This isn't to say that he's not slippery. He's very slippery. And again, back to body control, back to setup. That's where he wins in these instances. He has a suddenness about him that allows him to become a playmaker. There's a suddenness and change of speed. Stop, start, I think is the best way to put it. From having the ability to very quickly work up the speed and then very quickly kind of turn it off and then get back on the gas again. That is what separates him. That's what makes him dynamic.
I think these are two great examples. This gives me like the Jahmyr Gibbs vibe, not only in how fast that he puts his hand on the ground and then takes off again, but also kind of that instinctive feel, like when to take off and be slippery. So the defender is really about to close and try to make his tackle attempt, and then I'm going to burst, and then he's not going to be able to get me on the play. Just that little slither between the tackle box that you constantly see where he's kind of just like working away in and out, in and out. You don't get the natural elusiveness, but the slipperiness is incredible.
But in just terms of natural elusiveness, shiftiness, shake, agility, that is an area that I do feel that he is lacking. So again, lower body control, we saw it against Cal, for example. His feet are typically on the ground, and he also plays with excellent knee bend, which helps him a ton. I think he's also got some ankle flexion as well. And you see the ability to kind of just skip through traffic with control. You think, though, he's a little bit more lungy. You will also see that kind of in a phone booth. He's not going to bring that agility or that shake. He also doesn't have much creativity either. I think some of that's limited. You could also probably add a little bit of creativity, like just having a natural ability with the ball in your hands. For him, it kind of turns into a lot of times like, all right, how can I set this up? But if it comes down to a phone booth, he doesn't really have an opportunity to just hit a different run lane. Then you get to a spot where he really doesn't have a move to beat somebody. He doesn't have a trump card one-on-one when he's getting angled to the sideline. He doesn't have that shake. Doesn't have like a go-to spin move. He doesn't show like a stutter necessarily. He'll try to change speeds a little bit, but then it's usually just turns it in, putting his head down and trying to run you over. Like there's not a lot of creativity when he's in space either. Even when he's trying to, kind of feel out those angles and he recognizes someone into the next level, it's about him kind of angling himself away from the defender to finish. It's about him angling him proactively. That's where he finds success, but he's not creative when he's one-on-one in space. That is an aspect that I do think is lacking to kind of have that immediate agility necessarily, but he does carry some slipperiness, and you'll see that again kind of working through traffic. He also shows a kind of an inability to tightrope, and you'll see that like for here where he slips on the ground, falls down, trying to kind of tightrope here toward the line of scrimmage. Other times it feels like he's just like, you know what, I'm not even going to try to do that. Let me not try. So instead for him, again, the wide zones, outside zones, you'll see him press towards the sideline, sink himself, plant, and then burst upfield off of that. But naturally, kind of like tight roping or cornering, that's probably going to be a little bit of struggle as well. Cornering around an offensive tackle, it's going to get a little bit wider than it is going to be like, he can kind of get real linear on the play and kind of lean. You don't get a lot of the lean, extra steps at times when he's trying to work through some of his cutback lanes. Now, I did like some of his cutback vision, going back to that side, is that he did have an awareness of a feel for linebackers into the second level, and he was really fast through that process. So, hey, like I feel a linebacker, he's stepping down here really quickly, processes that, and then he can cut back off it. And he's patient. He's got the patience, but the burst to quickly work through gaps. That's a huge part of it. He plays with the patience to press, but not necessarily just run into traffic. But he also kind of just slightly changes angles, slightly changes directions, right? He'll get tight, he'll kind of press inside, then he'll press back outside quickly. He just wants to create a little bit of slither, a little bit of room. That's where he creates some slipperiness between the tackles. And then he has the cutback vision, but also he's not like blind. He doesn't just run it. It's like, I know that's not there, but I'm still going to run there. He doesn't want to do that, really. And he consistently can make the first guy miss with that body control because he could just slam on the brakes. He could do this in space as well. But for me there, and I could tie back into the vision a little bit, natural elusiveness is not his strong suit necessarily. I think his play speed is better than the 40 time would represent, especially the 4.62 specifically. He hits his second year very quickly. He's very quickly up to T-speed. That 10-yard split is huge. And he also shows kind of that discipline where if it's there, he's going to hit it. Like if it's going towards that run lane and that opens up, he's going to hit that immediately. And there's going to be there's going to be a lot of decisiveness. Out turning the corner acceleration, a little bit limited. Again, getting the edge, turning the corner, the lean, that's a little bit below average. But he does have the ability to drop his weight, explode upfield. He's a strider that finishes. When he gets out in space, second, third level, when he sees the end zone, he's a finisher. That's not one of these guys going to like look back or take like terrible angles. Like, why would you do that? He is a finisher. He gets out in space. He's not looking back. He's a finisher until he crosses the goal line. He wants to get in the end zone. I don't love how sometimes he sticks the ball out early. I think, again, ball security issues, but he wants to score. He is a finisher. Whether that's first down, whatever that is, he wants to finish falling forward, and he wants to get into the end zone if the opportunity arises. And when you see that burst, you'll see it also in his hips, and specifically when, again, he is trying to get around the edge, he has that ability to kind of out-angle guys, and he has no issue with going a little bit wider to kind of just out-angle a defender. That's something that I think he has a pretty good sense for, is angles. At the line of scrimmage, I thought it was a little bit more inconsistent when he got downfield in terms of the angles that he would take towards the end zone. I think that there was usually a feel like, let me get away from everybody, let me go to get to the end zone this way. But in terms of once he got, guys that were on his hips, second and third level, guys that were trying to track him down, trying to angle himself away from those players, thought that was a little inconsistent, but he typically had his eyes on the end zone. See the kind of the ability to sit, stop, and start. I think this is the best example here against USC where he just slams on the brakes and he just takes off again. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful reps, and it's also the little angle route, which everybody loves. He is just tight-hipped. This is one of the bigger issues, especially as a receiver as well. He's tight-hipped, okay, so you'll see that. That does come up as a little bit of an issue, especially, again, in space and when you talk about some of that playmaking aspect. To me, though, kind of wrap this thing up, that receiving upside, the route tree, I think there's a lot of versatility here just in what he's capable of doing in terms of his route tree. With the knee bend that he plays with, the ability to drop his weight, the explosiveness in a short area, the ability to separate level 1, level 2 against defensive backs. He also plays with that awareness where if it's zone, like, okay, let me sit down. If it's man coverage, let me kind of race through it. He plays with the ready hands, and you'll see him kind of adapt and also make himself a target for the quarterback. He does a pretty nice job, flat routes, getting out into the flats, getting out on swing routes, making himself squared to the quarterback to make himself a visible target. Now, there was inconsistencies, like we saw the interception where he kind of broke it off inside, seemingly recognized that it was zone. He's like, let me park this route, and the ball was picked off, not really on the same page. And I do think that some of that can also come back to just, timing and then obviously discipline. That's got to be on point to have success in this offense. You got to be on time with Goff, okay? You can't run through your route or sit down at a different time when he's not expecting it. Not saying that's on him, but you'll see even that with some of his route discipline, where it's like you see the capability to sit, but I don't like how at top of routes it would break out. It would break loose. It's like, hey, we got to dial that in, okay? I don't want you, the head turning back, you're starting to rise up because you're going to sit. Like, that's unnecessary. I want to keep these routes disciplined. So he does tend to make himself a pretty good target, and he has a real feel of like, okay, this is zone, the flat's opening up, let me kind of roll this direction, or let me press, or let me pull my wheel route this direction away from coverage. So this is man, okay? And then you'll see the stabs at the top of the route consistently. He's pretty sudden in those spots where he consistently has those. They're aggressive, creates separation. The angle routes, he presses with a lot of aggression into that break point, and that's what creates that separation because he can really sell it, especially when it's in man coverage. I just think he has a lot of separation ability, but some of the route running, discipline, detail, timing, probably going to have to dial in. It's going to have to dial in for our offense. And then again, ball security, so seemingly just at times getting a little loose with it on his arm. Now, he was instinctual when to protect the football. He'd kind of feel it, and he'd instinctually protect the football, so I did like that. And he does play with pretty strong hands just in general in traffic, and I think you'll see that especially as a pass catcher. So we'll tend to kind of stick the ball out, and I don't love that. I get it, though, but it's just something to kind of keep an eye on. So for me, overall, Vaki is a guy that I know I've been saying it for kind of a minute now. I think this guy could be special at running back. I really do. I think he can be a special offensive weapon. However you want to use him, I think he could be special. Hey, maybe this is like the Taysom Hill, right? I mean, like, seriously, like, you could put him as a wildcat. You could utilize him on special teams in a lot of different roles. I think he has a real ability to do that because he brings the play speed, brings the mentality to do it. But then also, he can catch the football. He can run. Like, I think his versatility becomes very dynamic if we could dial in some of the detail there and we could just see more reps. Biggest question to me is pass pro because I literally just did not see it. That'll be the big question. Where is that at, technically speaking? So when you move on to kind of the grade side of things, as you can see here, vision for me, above average. I just think timing, things like that are going to have to be kind of ironed out. You need to just see more reps in general, different scheme types as well. Consistently getting behind his offensive lineman. I think that at times wouldn't always be there. He'd leave too much space, leave too much gaps. I do like how when he presses the gap, he has a really good sense for vision at that point. He reads linebackers well, quickly gets into the second and third level. Once the run lane opens, he's quickly on to the next defender, processes that fast, and he sets it up through the run. That's where he thrives there. Contact balance is my strongest grade right now. I think that is massive because that separates anytime you have the football. That allows you to be a playmaker. Pass game impact, this is mainly a projection. It really is, but I'm buying into it. Now, I told you I had some of the little bit lower in certain spots, limitations maybe, also detail, but I'm buying into the fact that this guy, like Jahmyr Gibbs, I had a higher grade on Gibbs, but he's up there. This guy is a natural receiver with the awareness to do it. I'm so excited about that upside. I think the more and more guys you get that could separate against man coverage, level 1, level 2, where Goff is going to live, doesn't matter what position, receiver, tight end, running back, we need more of those guys. So if we go out there and we need 4 yards in the 3rd and 4, because this is just how it works. If it's 3rd and 4, Goff is going to have a read that he wants to get to. Let's say it's 3rd and 4, Goff gets to the line, boom, it's man. They do their checks, get to a man beater, and Vaki's one of the weapons out there, and it's like, hey, you're the matchup that I want. I'm going to this guy. He needs to win that matchup. It's just that simple because if I do my drop and I go to, I know it's man. So it's not an issue of like, well, this has got to wait for this hole to hit because it's just going to be open when it wait. It's not like that. Like, you have to just separate. If I do my 3-step drop and I look to you and you're covered up and he took you away, all of a sudden now I got to get to 2. Now I got to get to 2, and now we risk sacks. That's why it's necessary to have guys that can win, because I don't care what position you put to his name. It don't matter to me. Line him wherever you want. Can he separate if I need you to separate? Because in an offense, timing offense, you got to be on time, but against man coverage, it's all, can you win your matchup? It doesn't matter if I know where I'm going. If everybody loses their matchup, nobody's open, nobody's winning here. Somebody has to win. And to me, I think his ability to separate level 1 and 2 down the road is going to be the biggest element. I thought that would be huge with Gibbs, and I think that's what's massive here. You got to be able to win. It's just as simple as that. Because I can't snap the ball and see everybody at the same time. I can't. All right, we can see it in the all-22, but if Goff's looking here because that's the matchup he likes and you lost that matchup, now I got to get to 2. Now time's running out. And if I missed, the other guy on the outside of the field was open. Well, it's like, hey, I wasn't looking there. There's nothing I can do about it. Like, I can't, my eyes don't work that. I can't see literally everything at the same time. So, got to be able to win. I'm sorry for the little rant there. Elusiveness, again, a little bit on the lower side. I think he's sudden. I think he's slippery. I think that helps with his elusiveness. It's just kind of a weird category to put it into, but the agility, those kind of things, a little bit lacking. Power, he's a strong runner, nasty stiff arm. Play speed and playmaking to me is good. I think it's on the good level right now. For me, I think playmaking can honestly be higher than play speed. If I had to put one or the other, I'd put playmaking higher. And then ball security, small sample size, but I think that's always something to be kind of like cautious of. Like, hey, we need to dial this in. So with that being said, Sione Vaki is a Detroit Lion, and I'm going to leave it right there, potentially a part 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prep, for watching, and I'm out.